Hi everyone. I am Preetha Mahanti, and welcome to this special conversation for Tenopus. Last month on December 15th, the news of Bell Hooks' demise was heartbreaking for a lot of us. For those of you who know her and her work, you probably know that it's not easy to introduce her, to define who Bell Hooks was really. But for those of you who are not familiar with her, I'll just attempt to, a brief introduction. So Bell Hooks was a teacher, a feminist scholar, author, a social activist whose groundbreaking work exploring the intersectionality of gender, race, class has left us with a rich legacy of ideas. And as readers from different backgrounds and contexts, we all have found something in her writing that really spoke to us in a way that nothing before that had spoken to us. And, therefore, the impact of Bell Hooks really. And for us at Tenopus, Hooks's idea on art as essential to our collective well-being has been, one of the inspirations behind, starting this publication. And she's always been that bridge connecting ideas, people, and communities. And it's actually through her that we, got to meet our guest for today. Hi, Nadia, and welcome to this conversation.
Hi, thank you so much for extending this. I'm looking forward to talking with you, and it's being able to talk about bell hooks right now. I think losing her last month, it just made me refocus on her and her work, and I feel like I'm recommitting to her in a way. So thank you for this opportunity.
And so, if I could introduce Nadia to our audience. So, Nadia Daniel Smole is an interdisciplinary artist. She's based in Michigan, and she believes that through art, storytelling, and education, the world can transform. And she hopes to help this transformation along in any way she can. She both freelances and works with multiple organizations offering community organizing, arts, and education programming. And together with her sister Sonja, she co founded the nonprofit Look, Wonder, Discover with the mission to cultivate curiosity. And it was actually her sketch, which was titled Organic Interbeing, inspired by bell hooks, which really got us interested. And therefore, we thought we'll just invite her to talk about bell hooks, and that would be a fitting tribute to this extraordinary public figure. And I'll just share the screen to show. Yeah. So that's a sketch which we absolutely loved, and this is how we have Nadia with us today. So, firstly, to start this off, just tell us about your introduction to bell hooks. Like, when was the first time that she happened to you?
Oh, I love your phrasing of that because she really did happen to me. I grew up in a house and still live in a house completely full of books. And as Bell Hooks was always there, a book on the shelf. She was a person that influenced my mother in unconventional education. So before I even really understood who she was, she affected me much because of work like hers that I grew up with the understanding that things like creativity and education and feminism and cultural justice are just part of learning and part of life. And so she really has helped spark this little activist spark in me as well. But really, I began to interact with her as a teen. I really felt the accessibility of her work and her theories. It really helped me understand that all of this work really starts with us as individuals. And so as I've grown up, really interacting and trying to come back to her work and my own work, I just understand that her, along with a lot of other intersectional creatives, thinkers, writers, have really encouraged me to facilitate cultural and personal engagement through creative work and understanding that art's a lot more than aesthetic choices. It's how we
Sure.
interact with each other. So she's, I remember reading her for the first time when I was maybe 15. And I was
Okay.
like, I think I want to know who that name on the shelf is. And since then, she's been somebody who's definitely helped me steer through life. But I know I have to ask how you were introduced to her and how she's affected you as well. That's something leading up to this, I've been very curious about.
Okay. So so Bell Hooks happened to me again when I was in my undergrads in Presidency University, and I think probably undergrads or masters maybe first year, and we had some of our essays. Uh, and there were I think we had teaching to transgress also as part of our curriculum, and so the one of the amazing things that I recall about having felt while reading her work was that uh, she was just talking about the basics, and that was so revolutionary. Like, I'll have to admit it seems rather stupid now when I think about it, but I really had a difficult time engaging with feminism as a theory. Uh, in the sense that, of course, so much. I mean, when I got introduced to it, there was this, I mean, all aspects of it. I just could not relate it to the practical life, right? Like, I just didn't know what, how, the impact of theory I had not really felt till then, and
Yeah,
everything so far was on paper. So I know it. I can't even articulate it. Like that was my problem with.
I understand. I feel like
Yeah,
we all understand that to a
yeah,
level
yeah, yeah,
because, and she says that in about education and how when
yeah.
the theory and both, how she brings feminism into the classroom and racism and anti-racism into the classroom
Yeah.
and to talk about that she says, it only works if you practice it. That's one of the premises of her work. And that, yeah, but you were saying,
Uh, yeah, so and especially in teaching to transgress, she has this line where she says that classroom really is that space where you get freedom. Like to be in a classroom was an act of resistance, and that sort of was extraordinary to come across. So even before this interview, I was talking to a lot of friends and who were with me in the university, and I was telling them just tell me about what you recollect about. I mean, not recollect really. I mean, once you've read Bell Hooks, she just stays with you. She's just a
yeah,
part of it.
uh-huh.
So that's what they were saying, that she was really talking about the things that they're just there in front of us. We just need to think about it. And also because her work was something uh, that concerned everyone. It also concerned men. It also concerned her own community, and all of it. Like, so this wasn't one thing against another. It was it was a continuous conversation. That, and of course, like you rightly said, the accessibility. She was not talking in jargon. She was not giving us big words.
Right.
Even something as simple as when she creates a alternative character. Like, of course, we all know that she was born as Gloria Jean Watkins, and it's the name that Bell Hooks is a name that she took from her, I think, maternal grandmother as an homage to her, and all the women who've come before us. And also, when she creates that alter ego and she has a conversation with that, you really understand how, I mean, what a prolific writer she was, definitely, but like a thinker also.
Mhm.
So yeah, and about the sketch, one of the things that I loved about it is because most of her portraits, she has that iconic picture where she's looking straight into the camera, and uh, you know, and of course her eyes are what attracts you. And in your sketch, particularly the fact that you focused on that one eye of hers. And so, could you just explain what was your idea behind this sketch? And I guess it was part of the eye project.
Yeah, so it was day 346 of my 365-day art project and challenge. I called it Cognizant. I replaced the I in the word cognizant with EYE because I wanted to be clever. I was almost 18 at the time, and
Okay.
I realized that in order to commit to a creative practice that in depth and that kind of commitment, I needed a reason. And so I thought, okay, why not? I love drawing eyes, so
Mhm.
there's the creative reason. But then for me on a cultural level, it was really simplistic, but I think it still holds true, is that if we, in a world that really we focus so much on, we have these technologies and these divisions that keep our perceptions and our gazes very fixed.
Mm.
And that my idea then, sort of as it is now, is that if we could just look at each other and look in eyes and every day just spend a little bit of time connecting with the humanity in somebody else, we could have huge culture shifts of the like Bell Hooks writes about.
Yes.
So for me, it was, in that project, it started out very simplistic, but as I went, I started to draw portraits of people I met on the street and people who really I admired. And so, of course, Bell Hooks was part of that. So this piece um, started with just reflecting on her. So it was the fourth drawing in a series that I did of authors ranging from people from like Zora Neale Hurston to Jesmyn Ward, and who really affected how I've viewed the world. So for her portrait, I found this photograph and I could see her almost the way she was smiling at the camera. She had this sort of, it was like she knew more than she was telling. And I feel like that was so much part of her writing, is that she understood things at a deep level and was able to invite you in. And I felt like the photograph is doing that. So as I drew from it, as I hatched and worked on the line work, these organic shapes sort of happened. And I reflected on this quote from The Will to Change, and I actually have it. I wrote, so the whole piece is inspired by let's quote, that's interbeing and interdependency are the organic relationship of all living beings.
Yeah,
and
right.
for me, that kind of encapsulated that idea of her work. And back in 2019, when I did this piece, that was really, how she was still alive, and there was this idea of that work continuing. But returning to it after her passing reminds me how making the space to draw her eye really captured how her work invites all of us to approach her every day in order to enhance. She wrote something that really has struck me, as simply to enhance our capacity to live more fully in the world.
Sure,
And
right.
for me, that piece, just, however long it took me to draw that day, close to the end of my project, to be sort of present with her and her work then, and seeing how it affects now. And there really is that interbeing and interdependency that we have with her work and her legacy almost now. And so seeing how it kind of continues through us and our conversations with it.
Yeah. So how long did it actually take the portrait?
For that one, because I was, I had been drawing a lot, so my practice was definitely more improved than it had been at the beginning. So probably only took me an hour and a half for that one
Oh,
at
that's
that
fast,
point.
like given the
Yeah.
details that you captured.
I was when you do something every day, it is surprising how fast your
Uh,
abilities, the sort of finger memory of drawing eyes. I mean, I can still do it easily now, because when you make that commitment, sort of mind, body, and soul to
mm.
something at such a young age too, I was
Yeah,
very
that's what,
dedicated.
yeah, that's what actually struck me. It's that you're so young when you, I mean, when you did that, like, as an idea also, to have that idea and it's a huge task also, like 365 days. It's not a joke, and every day to sit. I think that discipline is what really matters, um, and in this, one of the things that I really loved when you were describing the sketch is that this idea that we spend some time looking at each other and really connecting, and that it echoes Bell Hooks's ideas on love. Where she says that love begins with the needs of the body. Uh, that's something that again I wrote it down when I was listening to one of her interviews, and that way, yeah, I mean, when you listen to her interviews, there's just so much that they hold. But yeah, on her ideas on love, it's I think in one of it's probably in All About Love, where she says that when she talks about the US, and she says that it's a culture driven by the quest to love, but like quite tragically, lovelessness pervades. And
Yes.
uh, so, and of course, if we go back to 2019 and, of all the things that have happened, all of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if you could, talk about that part, like uh, when you think of love, it's, how, let's say, how revolutionary was her ideas on love to you? Like, how did you rethink love, let's say? Uh,
Yeah, the her work, I know that the English language is limited in the fact that we only have one word for love.
yeah,
And her work also, as someone I've always loved philosophy. It's one of my great loves, but I was always very frustrated at the idea of the mind and body being separate because physiologically
mhm,
our mind and our body and our self are all essentially on that level the same thing. And there was, as a woman who is interested in philosophy, as a feminine person, there felt like there was a disconnect between my human self and
mhm,
and ideas. And just like we were talking about earlier with theory and becoming into practice, and we don't know how to put it into practice until we can contextualize it in our own selves.
right,
And so her approach to love as being just part of life and part of theory and part of all of it, um, really affected me in the sense that, I think when we get too far away
mhm,
from where we are, from each
right,
other, from our own perception and our own emotions in a situation, too much analyzation, too much, you need the balance between both. And I think, we need to be able to seek that love in the sense of, both that common humanity we share with everyone and also the physical need. We crave closeness with each other. And I think everyone in the last couple of years understands that at such a raw level
sure, yeah,
because whether it's isolation or being forced to be around other people when you don't feel comfortable or safe on a regular basis. I mean, our gathering places, especially where I live in the US,
mhm,
there's almost this general feeling of threat that, you'd go to the library and feel this sense of excitement. And then now there's just this sense of wariness. And I think it really helps me realize just how that idea of love and connection, love forces us in the most positive way to connect with each other. And I think that we need to, I feel like I said recommit to bell hooks earlier, but also recommit to that
yeah,
sense of that love and not let it inform fear, but let it inform curiosity instead.
sure. And yeah, and also, this whole idea of the love ethics that she talks about, I think that was also something that, when I heard from the first time, and I thought, wow, this was, it was really important to think about it in a sense where she talks about love, community, and empathy. That
Mhm.
um, that's only, we can only invest in one another when we are part of a community, and only by investing in one another that we really build, empathy around us. So, and of course, because, we're in such times where, you know, it's COVID, and it's like every day something new is happening, but we're also stuck in some ways. So how, let's say, has it impacted your art practice? Let's say, if has was there a time when all of this was taking a toll on you, or you thought that interacting with the world was not happening at a pace where you wanted your creativity to flourish, let's say?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. In 2020, I had right when I finished the Cognizant project,
Mhm.
after 365 days, I said, okay, um, that project was very much about connecting and looking, and with that is perception. And I realized we can only scratch the surface, but I wanted to
Mhm.
go as deep as I could. And so I started the second year of the project, where I would paint within the golden spiral. I blew it up to life size and made these giant paintings
Mhm.
and wrote about and explored perception. Everything from like monsters to mathematics and science. And I was very excited to use the creation of that art to connect with people in person. And my ultimate goal was I had a show lined up for the end of that year-long project. So at the end of 52 weeks, the last week I would spend in a gallery of painting with people and having discussions about perception. And at the beginning of the pandemic, it was almost like the project coincided perfectly with it. And I realized that I had to really rethink that. And it was very much like Gloria Watkins talking with Bell Hooks, with me talking with myself about perception, because what I thought would be more community connection was genuine isolation.
Mm.
My house is in the forest.
Yes.
And so while I was very lucky to have fresh air and space, it was, very shocking to see other people. And so there was that moment of disconnect. And so for me with that project, I said, well, why don't I almost like go back through archives and be reflective and as the project then in October of 2020, right before the week before the election. So it was a really fraught time.
Mm.
We were all incredibly nervous, and I said, okay, I still want to find a way to have a connection with people at the end of this because we need it more than ever.
Yeah.
So I instead of painting in a gallery, I painted in the gallery's window. And so I
Mm.
was separated by a piece of glass on the street, painting and thinking about perception. And really, one thing that as I painted and as I sort of felt that it was almost like me being in public and yet still isolated,
Okay.
captured that feeling of the pandemic that is so strange for us connected, loving humans to
Mm.
experience.
Yeah.
Because on a physical level, I was there, but I was just also, separate. It made me think of something that essentially our perceptions, they really do shape how we interact with the world.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has shown the world
Yeah.
that, and that the divisions that we're experiencing, so many come from people
Mm.
not understanding that we all have different perceptions and we need to respect each other's perceptions and be curious about them. But in order to do that, in order to just understand that we actually
Mm.
do, we're looking through the veils of our own perceptions, we need this combination of like reflection and action. And that was exactly what was happening in that window that week. Was I was reflecting while I was working and seeing people walk by, and it reminded me of something Bell Hooks wrote in Teaching to Transgress. She said that we need action and reflection upon the world in order to change it. And
Yes.
so that's something that with the pandemic, whether it's whether we're reeling from isolation or forced to engage with very broken
Mm.
systems, we're being given sort of forced to reflect on the things that are broken and the cracks in our foundations globally. I know
Yeah.
people all over who are experiencing very similar experiences, and I also think that that action that we're also, I'm very hopeful that we're ushering in a time of especially younger generations seeing like how we can, patch the cracks or build new foundations. And so it's like, it's that action and
Mm.
reflection that it all kind of culminated. And so for me, the pandemic, like there's solitude that is necessary to creating art. But in order to make art, for me, to make
Mm.
give art that meaning, that there needs to be a connection. There needs to be this sort of discovery and this opportunity, because I really do think art has the potential to change culture, but
Okay.
we have to be able to communicate. And so it's this tedious balance. But I think the pandemic just sort of put everything in stark relief. Um,
Yeah.
for me,
Exactly.
I've been able to see things much differently.
Mm. And it's since you mentioned the election, and I'm very tempted to ask also because it's something that somewhere similarly we've all been facing. I mean, here in India also, things are kind of similar. Like, and what I'm referring to is this polarization, right? Like, there was such a huge polarization, that happened in the society, and so when it's a pandemic and then all of it. So especially with the presidential election in the US, let's say, what was something about that time, or even now, if you say, is it bothered you most? Like, uh,
It's
as a
really
citizen, and or I mean, as artists, of course, those things are not really separate, but yeah.
yes, exactly. And that's something that just to preface what I'm
Mm.
going to say is that there's this idea too of like the aesthetics of art being separate from
Yeah, yeah.
politics. But because of people like Bell Hooks, I know that just existing in my body is political. I know
Right,
that
right.
just making art that says something beyond what it looks like is political.
Yeah.
And that For me, I grew up very much an activist. My parents would bring me to protests when I was very small. I'd be on their shoulders, and my sister and I, it's part of our life. And so I was always very aware of democracy and politics as a child, a very young child. And in 2016, seeing the Trump administration, and I hate to bring that into this conversation, but you know what? It's
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
That administration really showed me how there is this, there are these senses of politics that I just think communication and being able to be open to each other is so important. And seeing all of these foundations of democracy and civil rights and social justice that we hold dear, like that I hold dear as an American, really be questioned and mocked.
Yeah.
And then with the pandemic and then the election all in that time, I think I was I was definitely discouraged in the sense that I think in normal times that election could have been an opportunity for people to feel bolstered, for
Right,
people
right.
to build networks. And I know that while I definitely worked and tried, that it was with the pandemic, it just, I see how unfortunately the far right is even more far right because of it. And because there are so many things that where I think a lot of people are talking about reaching across the aisle, but I think it's more about saying, well, what are we trying to do? What is our goal? And for me, I know the goal is to uphold democracy and to just try and be a good person. And I want politicians to reflect that as well and to respect that that's kind of what we all want deep down. But I, you know, watching people leading the country who are mocking it at the same time was incredibly frustrating to me. And knowing that things that a lot of people like bell hooks have worked very hard for
Yeah.
are facing one person's like, I don't like that anymore decision, or it doesn't fit my political agenda, that I think anyone who understands the processes of things like democracy could get, you know, as riled up as I did, for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something similar that we feel here in India as well. Yeah. And also because I think in Bell Hooks' writing, there's one very important idea of how conversation is sort of like the best way of learning, and that conversation can only happen when you are not building walls. When you're not allowing walls between yourselves, and that's something that like and of course, as much as I hated it to be brought up in this conversation, but I deliberately asked that because it's such a, it's sort of like the elephant in the room thing. It's I'm from India, you're from the US. It just
The world's oldest and largest democracies. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
And thinking about that, and also there was another question sort of connected to it, but so when the when Bell Hooks writes about, let's say, ideas on gender, class, race, and as somebody, like, if I were to talk about myself, that class wise, of course, I mean, both of us, we're women, we face a certain kind of marginalization, let's say, and not a similar experience, but different. But then both of us are also privileged in certain senses, right? um,
Yes.
so as let's say, as a privileged person, as being as part of a majority in some senses, how does bell hook speak to you as somebody who's from as a privileged majority? Yeah.
Yes. That's a really, really good question. And thank you for asking it, because when you first reached out about this feature, I went, oh, I love bell hooks, but am I the right person to have this
Yes.
conversation?
And even
Because
yeah, if I could interrupt, like
yes, please
Uh,
do.
so even I was thinking about this question a lot, and I went it over in my mind, and I was like, is this the right question? Should I be asking her this question? Because, and then I realized that it's something very natural to ask, and of course, for people who are watching this interview, would also want, like, let's say the first thought that you had in your mind, that am I the right person? They would
Yeah.
also be saying, is she the right person, let's say, for a
Well,
tribute, for a conversation that's done in memory of her. But like,
yes,
uh, if it's about bell hooks, then the fact that she's just so much more than any label that you can associate with her. She just so. But
exactly.
yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yes, so to speak to that, her work with interdisciplinary, intersectional, like when you read her work, it's never just about one thing.
Yeah.
And so for me, as someone who is privileged, I think of myself as an incredibly privileged person. I also understand the limitations
Mhm.
of my body and my situation. But I realize that for me, it's almost like my duty in a way is to learn as much as I
Right.
possibly can and be like a sponge to other people's
Mhm.
experiences, to realize that empathy, and I want to be able to say this to all the people I know. I mean, Bell Hooks wrote The Will to Change. It was like feminism for masculine people.
Yes.
She was able
Right.
to she knew how to talk to people and say, this is a concept that we all understand as humans,
Mhm.
but we have to be able to check ourselves, and we have to
Yeah.
be able to say, wait a minute, I'm seeing the world from my perspective, and it can only see so much. And so for me, with Hooks's work and being who I am, where I am, when I am, there's a lot. I'm able to talk to you on technology. I'm able to
Yes.
have resources, to have lots of books, and to realize that is something that, for me, I see that to be able to contextualize things and to be open, that is something that art, I found, can be an amazing sort of facilitator for that,
Yeah.
is that we can, to be able to have those conversations, and for me to say, okay, if I'm going to make art, it needs to say something, and how can the all of the things that I've sort of collected over, all the things that people, how can we be more aware and more curious, I think.
Right.
And so for me, works like Bell Hooks make me see that we have to commit to hard work, and we have to commit to challenging ourselves. And for me, and so again, thank you for answering this or asking this question. Because for me, it's very much about saying, I think Bell Hooks has helped me see that in order to be who I am, where I am, when I am, I have to be open to challenge and curiosity, and pursue that at the same time.
Right. And now I wanted to ask about this community project that you have with your mom and your sister, and it was really exciting to go through the link, the website link that you had provided, and of course, and for our audience, we have a little similarity. So Tenopus is also run by 3 people, and Nadia also has a 3-member team, and they have this collective called Look, Wonder, Discover, and they do a lot of community creative and learning work. And of course, again, Bell Hooks' ideas fit perfectly in this, and she was always talking about that communities of practice where learning is contextual and meaningful, that the classroom can be everywhere, and you could be learning anything. So
Mhm.
yeah, talk to us a little bit about that.
Amazing. Well, I'll start because our history is very interesting.
Okay.
So the project officially, began when my sister was 6 and I was 10. It began
Oh, okay.
because we were very wary of tech and the internet, and we preferred books. But our mom understood the potential for interconnection and community building, and interacting through technology. And so we started a website, started a blog, called the Books for Walls Project. We began the Books for Walls project, with supporting literacy libraries and book love, and with that understanding that we learned that there was this sense of interbeing with, that idea of, uh, it was like you could ask someone, what they
Yeah.
were reading. You could ask someone, their first memory of a book, and you get to know them, on a more personal level. And that really showed us, whether it was connecting with the library in
Mhm.
Antarctica, or helping to save a library in near our home. We just realized that there was this sense of shared community, and community building. And so now, as we've grown up, so is the project, and
Right.
now it's called Look, Wonder, Discover, and
Mhm.
it's expanded to encompass things like, futures in digital literacy, community building art, and our goal is to cultivate curiosity. And so with that, being involved in this work since I was a child, you know, from helping my parents to facilitate community art and workshops. It's really shown me how the attempt to facilitate this kind of interbeing, it comes from a place of like creativity and persistence, and
Oh,
this need to invite people in and to build networks, both locally and global networks.
yeah,
And we have to keep trying. So I learned that that persistence is really part of the work, and I think that's something Bell Hooks has touched on a lot. Is this we
yeah.
have to keep working, we have to keep adapting, we have to share, we have to, you know, whether it's ideas, spaces, or
Mhm.
possibilities, we have to share things with each other. And it's very much this kind of, if it's creative community building, is very much a constant
Sure.
practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's constantly evolving, and coincidentally, that's also from my experience what curiosity is. And so it's this, they
Mhm.
sort of reinforce each other. And I just, yeah, the work that we've done and continue to do, and our plans for the future definitely revolve around this idea of, if you have knowledge, share it. And
Yeah.
if you can build community along the way, and encourage people to feel that as well. Um, I feel like there's this transformative power of it, and
Yeah.
it really inspires me.
And it's also amazing how, your project in certain ways is also like going back to basics,
Hmm.
like Bell Hooks would say, something simple like walking into a library, you know, taking a book off the shelf, reading, connecting, and despite everything that we're doing virtually these days. But yeah, and I think there's one thing very interesting that I found on the website was how I think it was your sister who discovered the antlers
Yes.
the in the forest.
Yeah, so
And
she
yeah,
discovered an extinct elk skeleton in the bottom of a lake near our house. So, you know, that's every 10-year-old's dream, I think. If you like nature, you're like, I'd like to discover
mhm,
something. And
okay,
she had this amazing experience. Yeah.
yeah. And I think you took it to the university and the I think there were you interacted with professors
Yes.
of biology. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, at the University of Michigan, and then
Mhm.
we actually funded a Kickstarter for her to carbon date and DNA test, and so we were
Ah,
able to find
okay.
that this is one of the only specimens of this extinct kind of elk.
Okay.
And we actually went to the Smithsonian. She interviewed the director of the Smithsonian Museum when she was about
Mhm.
11 at that point, and um, it really the actually the tagline for that project. I helped her. I illustrated some shirts for her her Kickstarter campaign, and the tagline for it was "Look, Wonder, Discover." And so we did
Yeah.
that, and we are like, wait, that we need to retool our project, because science is part of creativity on a certain level as well. And
Yes.
when we can connect everything, I think there's just this amazing curiosity. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of her work, I have to say.
And this also, it just goes on to show the interdisciplinary nature of your work, especially, this element of nature. As I think there's a discussion that we had over the email, where this particular again, this was one of the interviews I was going through, and she said that we should be willing to embrace the conditions of the world, and really, the questions about environment, nature, it's not very far off from when we talk about social justice, politics, and democracy. So this, it's all of it's in the same thing. So uh, tell us something about how nature comes through in your work, especially here. If I would like to tell the audience to go watch this video that you have on YouTube, where you sort of animate. I think this was the eye sketches.
Yeah, it was a
And
series within the
yeah,
Cosmic
yeah.
Project.
Yeah, yeah. And it's especially amazing how immersive it is. It's it's something that uh, it just takes you into a different world. You're left with your thoughts for that whole time that you're watching that video. So yeah, if you could talk about nature in your work, and I'm sure climate is a question that should be some. I mean, of course, is very close to you. You live in a forest, and with everything that's happening around here.
Yes, no, that's such a that's the kind of theme too that brings in the aspect as well of you know, talking about my privileged situation, and that I'm able to interact with nature And also understanding climate change and how it's very much a racist issue. It's very much a
Yes.
classist issue, and that
Yes.
nothing, it's all interconnected. And so for me, I've grown up near the Sleeping Bear Dune National Lakeshore. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
for me, the Great Lakes and these ideas of this really special kind of place in nature has made me really aware of the world around me, both natural and cultural. And it on like a visual level, the natural forms have affected me, but um, that that idea of nature and how it's affected my art can best be summed up by a bell hooks quote. She wrote in Teaching to Transgress that the engaged voice must never be fixed and absolute, but always changing, always evolving in dialogue with the world around itself. And
Right.
for me, there isn't anything better than nature to remind us of the world beyond ourselves, whether it's something vast and terrifying or small and fragile, that there's always something to remember that we are just part of this ecosystem. And that, nature is never still, it's constantly evolving.
Mhm.
It's creativity in this most foundational cellular sense. It's literally constant creation, destruction, repurposing, collecting, and creating again. And for me, that idea of nature as awareness, that if we're able to be open, whether it's just a piece of grass in the
Mhm.
crack of a pavement, or something like a mountainscape, we really, to be aware of that helps us see that we're not alone, and that we have a responsibility to the world around us.
Yeah, and really the whole idea of critical thinking is also something I think, there's so much to derive from nature, in the sense that if you really sit down and start thinking about it. So, yeah, and I think, we're probably coming to the end of the interview, and this one, and I think I wrote it somewhere because this was when I was talking to my friends. Um, yeah, about so one of my friends, she had a very interesting uh, idea when she saw that the cog Eyes project, and so I was circulating it among my friends, and I was like, this is really some very interesting stuff that you should look at, and if there's any question that you guys want me to ask her. And so one of the questions that I received was, so she was talking about the process of how you sort of, when you sit down with a particular sketch, because, these lines, they have such detailing. So somewhere, uh, this idea of um, creating an alternative reality with time, let's say, like, um, if uh, if I can just quote her, actually, just give me a second.
Yeah.
I think she put it really well. That these, because this is a very real time project that you do, uh, so it's at the same time that the reality is, in a sense fragmented, because you're doing parts of the eyes, but then all of it is again, structured together, in those crisscrossing lines, and there's a certain kind of fluidity. So if you could philosophize that for a bit, like it was something really to think about. And I said, oh wow, this wasn't something that I was thinking about when I saw that.
No, I think that's a really amazing concept, and really flattered that you asked that question, because it's something that with that piece and like that fragmented idea, um, part of it for me was when you're drawing on a
Mhm.
technical scale, you do have to fragment what you see and break it down
Yes.
into lines and shapes. But then those lines and shapes together create something very tangible,
Right.
and something very clear. And I
Mhm.
think that on a larger scale, that the project, that idea of the fragments coming together to make a whole, and that they needed to change. I mean, on days when I was feeling burnt out or uninspired, I just drew something small, or I did something very experimental. And then on days that I felt like a challenge, I really pushed myself. And that those on that
Right.
technical scale, and then on the story and perception scale, I think that while those fragments made the piece, I also
Mhm.
think that our perceptions are very much fragments of our lives and our experiences. And
Right.
we have to make the practice to put them together and to be aware of it. And so, together, we're ourselves, but we're on our own, but when we're able to come together with those
Mhm.
perceptions, they can kind of create a cohesive whole. And I think it's on like a technical scale, the project, and then just how we interrelate with each other.
Right, right. So I think we've covered, I mean, all the questions that I wanted to ask. If there's anything that you can, want to talk about, you can go ahead. Uh, is there anything that you want to add to this?
Well, there's one thing that I just realized, that with Bell Hooks
Mm.
and her work and remembering her, I was reflecting up, thinking this last week. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I just realized that living in such a time of cultural change, we really need to learn to be adaptive and how to rethink and relearn. We need to learn to
Yeah,
have these kinds of conversations and to ask difficult questions. And I really do feel that Bell Hooks's work has given us the tools to do just that. It's just very much up to us to do the work. And so for me, I
right,
feel like
right.
her work very much can live on through people who've been affected by it. And for us, it's to look through her work and find ways for hers to impact ours, and so that it can live
Yeah,
on through our embodied practices. And I think
right.
that I'm just very grateful to have this conversation with you, and to spend this time coming back to Bell Hooks and cementing her importance in our experiences.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure to have you in this this special interview. Also because it's amazing when I was thinking about just before the interview and I was preparing myself, and I was thinking, uh, such is a legacy, right? That here's when you want to remember her, and then she's somewhere by in her absence also connecting people.
Yes.
So, in so many ways, you and I having this conversation is because of her, is because of her work, is how she, sort of,
Yeah.
uh, asks you to imagine, think, uh, and as we close this, I think, so the day Hooks passed away, we have a WhatsApp group with some of my old friends in the university, and one of them, Devumita, she sent a picture and she's sort of sent a little note with it, and it was very overwhelming, of course, like because we all were trying to remember the first time when we read, and also like with writers, there's this thing that you really don't have to meet a writer, right? Like it's almost like interacting with that person in the
Mhm.
pages. And I thought it would be wonderful if we could end this session with with that little note that she wrote. And if you would allow, I'll just read it aloud.
Yes, thank you.
So she says that the death of bell hooks shattered our hearts. For those of us who read, reread, and keep going back to her writings to find peace, find calm, and heal, uh, it was a dark day. We lost a teacher, a friend, a comrade. I cried over the death of a person I had never met, but only hoped to. I cried over the death of a person whose face I only knew through book covers. Yet I felt I knew her. Her death felt like a personal loss. Her words, like sharp objects cutting through layers of domination and authority, paved way for an emancipatory feminist politics, one that questioned dogma, one that challenged homogeneity, one that recognized difference, and one that challenged all forms of oppression. She told us that it was okay to love and be hurt, that healing was an important lesson in growing. She told us that classrooms could be spaces of revolution, and that learning is the first act of defiance. She asked questions that scared the powers. She asked questions that destabilized our truths. In her own words, she believed that love is profoundly political and that collective acts of love can be a revolutionary force. She believed that love empowers us to live fully and die well. Death becomes then not an end to life but a part of living. Remembering her with love, for teaching to transgress, for telling us all about love and bringing out the will to change. Rest in love, bell hooks.
Oh,
So,
that's so perfect. That's fitting. Thank you
okay,
for sharing that.
okay. And so we'll end today's conversation, and we again thank Nadia for giving us the time, and would love to catch up again sometime.
Thank you so much for making this space.